Think of Valentine's Day. Roses. Candlelit dinners. Heart-shaped chocolates. Now forget all of that. Because the real story is much darker. What if I told you that this holiday of love began with goat sacrifices, public whippings, and a priest who was beaten to death? Would you still send a card?
Before you press play, take a moment.
Like and subscribe to Little Historical. Not because you have to, but because you want to know the truth that Hallmark will never show you. So here's the real question. How did a bloody Roman festival turn into the most romantic day of the year?
Stay with me.
Because the answer changes everything. Imagine mid-February in ancient Rome, but not the Rome of marble columns and toga parties you see in movies. This Rome smells of smoke, sweat, and animal blood. The festival is called Lupercalia, and it happens every year on the 15th of February inside a dark, damp cave on the Palatine Hill. That cave, they believed, was where a she-wolf once nursed the city's founders, Romulus and Remus. So already, you are standing on ground soaked in wild origin stories. Now, priests dressed in nothing but goat skins gather around a stone altar. They chant in low, guttural voices. A goat is brought forward, and then a dog. The air fills with the sound of hooves scraping stone and the sharp smell of fresh blood. The priests slit both throats. This is not a quiet ceremony. It is raw, loud, and unapologetically pagan. But the real strangeness comes next. Two young noblemen are led to the altar. The priests dip their fingers into the warm blood and smear it across the young men's foreheads. Then, without a word, they wipe the blood away using wool soaked in milk. And here is the detail that makes you lean closer. The young men are required to laugh. Not a nervous chuckle. A real, open, theatrical laugh. Why? Because the gods demanded joy even in the middle of sacrifice. You can almost feel the tension in that cave, blood on skin, then sudden, forced laughter echoing off stone walls. But the ritual does not end inside the cave. The priests cut the goat hides into long strips called februa, which is where the month February gets its name. They believe these strips carry a strange power, the power to purify and to make women fertile. So the young men, still half naked, run out into the streets of Rome, swinging the bloody leather strips at every woman they pass. And the women do not run away. They lift their hands. They turn their bodies toward the blows. They want to be struck. Because being touched by that freshly sacrificed goat hide, they believe, will help them conceive. It will make childbirth easier. It will protect their family line from disappearing. In a world where a woman's worth was often measured by her ability to produce heirs, this was not a game. It was survival wrapped in violence and hope. No roses. No whispered poetry. Just the crack of leather against skin, the smell of blood in the cold February air, and the quiet desperation of an empire obsessed with reproduction. But Rome was about to change. And that change would bury Lupercalia beneath the feet of saints and lovers. So Lupercalia faded, but February remained a strange and restless month. Centuries passed, and a new Rome emerged, one ruled not by pagan priests but by Christian emperors and ambitious generals. And then came Claudius II, a man history would call Claudius the Cruel. He needed soldiers, thousands of them, to defend an empire that was cracking at the edges. But he faced a problem that no amount of goat blood could solve. His young men did not want to leave. They had wives, sweethearts, children. They whispered goodbyes into soft ears and hesitated at the city gates. Claudius watched this and decided the only solution was to remove the distraction entirely. So he issued a decree that sounds almost too strange to be true. He banned marriage for young men. No weddings, no vows, no legal recognition of love. His reasoning was cold but logical: single men fight harder. A man with no wife has no reason to come home. He will charge into battle without looking back. And just like that, a young couple's quiet desire to build a life together became an act of defiance. Imagine standing before an altar, not in a grand cathedral but in a hidden room lit by a single oil lamp. The priest whispers the vows because speaking too loudly could bring soldiers crashing through the door. This was the world of Valentine, a Roman priest who refused to obey Claudius's order. He kept marrying young couples in secret, night after night, risking everything for a promise. And the women who came to him, they understood the danger. They held their lover's hand in the dark, knowing that if they were caught, the priest would die and their marriage would be torn apart. There is something deeply intimate about that kind of risk: two bodies pressed close in the shadows, a whispered oath, a ring slipped on a finger before dawn. Valentine did not see himself as a rebel. He saw himself as a servant of something older than emperors.
But Claudius saw only insubordination.
And when the emperor's guards finally broke down that door, they found more than a priest performing a ceremony. They found a quiet revolution wrapped in candlelight and trembling hands. That arrest would lead Valentine to a prison cell, a blind girl, and a letter signed with 4 words that would echo across 15 centuries. But first, he had to face the cruelty of a man who thought love was a weakness. And that is where the story turns even darker. The guards did not knock. They kicked the door open while Valentine was still wiping the marriage oil from his fingers. The couple he had just joined, a young soldier and a baker's daughter, were still holding hands when iron clasps closed around the priest's wrists. Claudius himself did not come to the dungeon. He did not need to. His message was clear: love is a luxury, and luxuries get crushed. Valentine was thrown into a cold, dark cell, the kind where the only light comes from a single slit in the stone. He had no weapons, no army, no miracle except the one he carried inside his chest. But prison did not silence him. According to the oldest accounts, Valentine continued to pray, continued to whisper hope to the other prisoners. And then something unexpected happened. The jailer, a hardened man who had seen thieves and murderers rot in those cells, brought his blind daughter to Valentine. He had heard rumors that this priest could heal. The girl was young, maybe 16, with empty eyes that turned toward every sound. Valentine did not promise her anything. He simply sat with her in the dark, described the flicker of the torch, the color of the rust on the bars, the way her own hair caught the light. Some versions say he prayed over her eyes. Others say he touched her lids gently. But what matters is that she began to see. Not all at once, but slowly, shapes becoming shadows, shadows becoming faces. And the first face she saw clearly was Valentine's. There is a quiet intimacy in that moment, a condemned man giving sight to a girl who had never watched the sun rise. She visited him every day after that. They talked, laughed, shared bread. And before his execution, he wrote her a letter. Not a long sermon, not a plea for mercy. Just a short note, and at the bottom, 4 words that would outlive emperors: your Valentine. The execution came on February 14th. Claudius ordered him beaten with clubs first, then beheaded. The girl never received another letter. But those 2 words, scratched onto parchment by a man waiting to die, planted a seed that no emperor could burn. That seed would sleep for centuries. And then poets would water it with verses about birds, longing, and a day dedicated to the most dangerous thing in the world: love. That seed lay buried for more than 1,000 years. Valentine's name was remembered, barely, by monks who scribbled martyrs into dusty calendars. But February 14th remained quiet, solemn, a whisper of blood and faith. Then came the birds. In medieval Europe, people noticed something strange. Every February, the birds began to pair. Rooks, doves, sparrows. They chose their mates as if some invisible hand had given them permission. Nature, it seemed, had its own romantic calendar. And where nature led, poets followed. Geoffrey Chaucer, a man who knew how to make words feel like desire, wrote a poem called Parliament of Fowls. In it, birds gather on Saint Valentine's Day to select their lovers. That single poem did something extraordinary. It untied the martyr from his execution and tied him instead to longing. Suddenly, February 14th was no longer about a beheaded priest. It was about choosing someone. About that breathless moment when 2 pairs of eyes meet and a decision is made. The aristocracy loved this. They were already obsessed with courtly love, that dangerous game of secret glances, handwritten verses, and longing that could never be fully satisfied. Noblewomen received anonymous notes pressed into their palms during feasts. Men wrote poems comparing their lover's skin to snow and their cruelty to winter. And all of it, found a home on Valentine's Day. But the real theft happened when the printing press arrived. What had once been intimate, a single letter written in a trembling hand, could now be copied hundreds of times. By the 18th century, printed Valentine cards were everywhere. Lace, ribbons, pre-written verses that said exactly what a shy suitor could not. The church had tried to control the day. The poets had romanticized it. But the printers and merchants did something far more permanent. They commodified it. Now you could buy affection. You could measure love by how elaborate the card was, how expensive the gift. And somewhere in that transaction, the last trace of the goat hide and the bloody cave faded away. The saint became a logo. The martyr became a mascot. And every February 14th, without knowing why, millions of people whisper your Valentine, repeating the last words of a man who died for the very thing that now comes wrapped in cellophane and tied with a ribbon.